The third plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. First, the General Assembly will hear a presentation by the Secretary-General of his annual report on the work of the organization under item 110. I now give the floor to the Secretary-General of the United Nations, His Excellency António Guterres.
Mr. President, distinguished heads of state and government, excellencies, colleagues, and friends. The United Nations Charter sends a clear message to us all: put people first. The first words of the Charter, we, the peoples, are a summons to place people at the center of our work. Every day, everywhere. People with anxieties and aspirations, people with heartbreaks and hopes, and above all, people with rights. Those rights are not a favor to be rewarded or withheld. They are an endowment for simply being human. Across the first half of my mandate, I've had the good fortune to meet people around the world, not in gilded meeting rooms, but where they live and work and dream. And I have listened. I've heard families in the South Pacific who fear their lives being swept away by rising seas. Young refugees in the Middle East yearning for a return to school and home. Ebola survivors in North Kivu struggling to rebuild their lives. Women demanding equality and opportunity. People of all beliefs and traditions who suffer simply because of who they are, and so many others. We are living in a world of disquiet. A great many people fear getting trampled, thwarted, left behind. Machines take their jobs, traffickers take their dignity, demagogues take their rights, warlords take their lives, fossil fuels take their future, and yet people believe in the spirit and ideas that bring us to this hall. They believe in the United Nations. But do they believe in us? Do they believe as leaders we will put people first? Because we, the leaders, must deliver for we, the peoples. Excellencies, people have a right to live in peace. 1 year ago in this room, I spoke of winds of hope despite the chaos and confusion of our world. And since then, some of those currents continue to move in promising directions. Against the expectations of many, elections unfolded peacefully in Madagascar, the Maldives, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to name just a few. Greece and the Republic of North Macedonia resolved their decades-long name dispute. Political dialogue in Sudan and the peace process in the Central African Republic have brought renewed hope. And the long-sought step forward has just been taken on the political path out of the tragedy in Syria and in line with Security Council Resolution 2254. As I announced yesterday, an agreement has been reached with all parties for a credible, balanced, and inclusive Syrian-owned and Syrian-led constitutional committee. My special envoy just left Damascus after finalizing the last details with the government and the opposition. And the United Nations look forward to convening the committee in Geneva in the coming weeks. But, Excellencies, across the global landscape, we see conflicts persisting, terrorism spreading, and the risk of a new arms race growing. outside interferences, often in violation of Security Council resolutions, make peace processes more difficult. And so many situations remain unresolved, from Yemen to Libya to Afghanistan and beyond. A succession of unilateral actions threatens to torpedo a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. And in Venezuela, 4 million people have fled the country, one of the largest displacements in the world. Tensions are elevated in South Asia, where differences need to be addressed through dialogue. And above all, we are facing the alarming possibility of armed conflict in the Gulf, the consequences of which the world cannot afford. The recent attack on Saudi Arabia oil facilities was totally unacceptable. In a context where a minor miscalculation can lead to a major confrontation, we must do everything possible to push for reason and restraint. And I hope for a future in which all the countries of the region can live in a state of mutual respect and cooperation without interference in each other's affairs. And I hope equally that it will still be possible to preserve the progress on nuclear non-proliferation represented by the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Excellencies, from day one, I have emphasized prevention, mediation, and a surge in diplomacy for peace to address the crises we face. Consider the lives we can save by intensifying our investments to sustain peace around the world. Across some of the most troubled corners of the world, some 100,000 UN peacekeepers protect civilians and promote peace. And through the Action for Peacekeeping initiative, we are strengthening our effectiveness and efficiency, and we are renewing partnerships with troop and police contributing countries, host countries, and regional organizations such as the African Union and the European Union. And I'm also proud of the work of our humanitarians easing suffering around the world. Fully half of all international relief aid is channeled through the United Nations, ensuring that millions receive protection, food, medicine, shelter, water, and other life-saving forms of assistance. This year alone, in brutal attacks and other circumstances, we have lost at least 80 peacekeepers, humanitarians, and others, all of whom gave their lives serving the United Nations and trying to better the lives of others. I honor their service and their sacrifice. Excellencies, we have bolstered our counterterrorism architecture and defined new strategies to tackle violent extremism and address root causes while respecting human rights. And I have put forward a new disarmament agenda to advance global peace. In the near term, the New START agreement must be extended. We must work to address the heightened threat posed by ballistic missiles and ensure a successful 2020 review of the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The situation of the Korean Peninsula remains uncertain, and I fully support the efforts towards a new summit between the President of the United States and the leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And at this time of transition and dysfunction in global power relations, there is a new risk looming on the horizon that may not yet be large, but it is real. I fear the possibility of a great fracture, the world splitting in two, with the two largest economies on Earth creating two separate and competing worlds, which with their own dominant currency, trade and financial rules, their own internet and artificial intelligence capacities, and their own zero-sum geopolitical and military strategies. We must do everything possible to avert the great fracture and maintain a universal system, a universal economy with universal respect for international law, a multipolar world with strong multilateral institutions. Excellencies, people have a right to security in all its dimensions. Every measure to uphold human rights helps deliver sustainable development and peace. In the 21st century, we must see human rights with a vision that speaks to each and every human being and encompasses all rights: economic, social, cultural, political, and civil. It would be a mistake to ignore or diminish economic, social, and cultural rights. But it would be equally misguided to think that those rights are enough to answer people's yearnings for freedom. Human rights are universal and indivisible. One cannot pick and choose, favoring some while disdaining others. People have a right to well-being and dignified standards of life, with health, housing, and food, social protection, and a sustainable environment. Education, not only to learn things, but to learn how to learn and prepare to the future. And decent jobs, especially for young people. These rights permeate the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and they are among our best tools for preventing conflict. Yet, we are not on track. Inequality is exploding. Our global economy generates great flows of income, but this prosperity is captured by a small number of elites. It is a sad fact of our world today that one's chances of leading a life free of want and in full human dignity still depend more on the circumstances of one's birth than one's innate capacities. Today's Sustainable Development Goals Summit and the Thursday's dialogue on financing are opportunities to ramp up ambition, including by utilizing the promise of technology and innovation as recommended by the high-level panel on digital cooperation that has concluded its report. Excellencies, as was emphasized in yesterday's Climate Action Summit, the climate emergency is a race we are losing, but it is a race we can win if we change our ways now. Even our language has to adapt. What once was called climate change is now truly a climate crisis. And what was once called global warming has more accurately become global heating. We are seeing unprecedented temperatures, unrelenting storms, and undeniable science. 10 days ago, in the Bahamas, I saw the ruin caused by Hurricane Dorian. That aftermath is a mere prelude to what science tells us is on its way. But something else is on its way: solutions. And the world is starting to move, not yet fast enough, but move in the right direction, away from fossil fuels and towards the opportunities of a green economy. And the Climate Summit highlighted some of the solutions we need to scale up in order to dramatically reduce emissions, keep temperatures rise to 1.5 degrees, and reach carbon neutrality by 2050. But we are not yet there. We must build on this momentum and do much more to be able to defeat climate change. Excellences,
people have a right to the fundamental freedoms that every country has promised to uphold. Yet, we today are at a critical juncture where advances made across decades are threatened, reversed, or undermined. We see wide-ranging impunity, including impunity for violations of international humanitarian law. We also see new forms of authoritarianism appearing, and the civic space is narrowing and citizens' voices are being stifled. Human rights advocates, environmental activists, and journalists are being targeted. Day after day, click by click, camera by camera, surveillance systems are expanding their reach and encroaching on our privacy. But these breaches go beyond the breakdown in rules governing the behavior of states and businesses. They are playing out on a deeper level. They bring into question our very compassion and our humanity. At a time when record numbers of refugees and internally displaced people are on the move, solidarity is on the run. We see borders, but also hearts closing and whole societies become hostile to foreigners. We can see refugees' families torn apart and the right to seek asylum flouted. We must restore the integrity of the international refugee protection regime and fulfill the promises of responsibility sharing set out in the Global Compact on Refugees. We must also build on the landmark adoption of the first ever Global Compact on Migration last December. And we have to strengthen international cooperation for orderly and regular migration and counter the smugglers and criminals who enrich themselves on the backs of vulnerable people. All migrants must see their human rights respected. Excellencies, around the world today, fear, sadly, is gaining ground. Isolation and mistrust are being used for political purposes, and that is why I launched 2 initiatives. The first one is a UN system-wide strategy to tackle hate speech. And the second one is an action plan to support efforts to safeguard religious sites and to uphold the right to religious freedom. Any minority, religious, ethnic, or other, must fully enjoy their basic rights. Social cohesion is rarely easy to obtain. Strong investments need to ensure that diverse community feels that their identities are respected and that they have a stake in the society as a whole. To those who insist on oppression or division, I say diversity is not a threat, it's a richness. It is unacceptable in the 21st century for women and men to be persecuted because of their identity, belief, or sexual orientation. We, of course, must also secure the rights of vulnerable and marginalized people. This year, I launched the first United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy. And, of course, we mustn't forget the world's most pervasive manifestation of discrimination, which affects fully half of humankind, discrimination against women and girls. Gender equality is a question of power, and power still essentially lies with men. And we can see that anywhere from parliaments to boardrooms, and even, we must say, this week in the halls and corridors and the meeting rooms of the United Nations. We must break with the rigidity of the past and truly see women's rights and representations as our common goal for the humanity as a whole. And I am working on this with the United Nations. Every day we're working to ensure gender parity as well as regional balance. Today, we have achieved parity in my senior management group and amongst the resident coordinators, that is, amongst those people who lead United Nations work at the country level.
Excellencies, I will not let up until we have reached gender parity at all levels at the United Nations and full equality for women and girls around the world. That means continuing to push back against the pushback against women's rights. It also means calling out a troubling commonality in terrorist attacks, extremist ideologies and brutal crimes, the violent misogyny of the perpetrators. And it means stepping up our efforts to expand opportunity. At present trends, it will take 2 centuries to close the gap in economic empowerment. We cannot accept a world that tells my granddaughters that equality must wait for their granddaughters' granddaughters.
Excellencies, as we continue all this vital work and more, I've launched ambitious reforms to make the United Nations more effective. I count on you to place our organization on sound financial footing. In an ever more divided world, we need a strong United Nations. Next year, we will mark the 75th anniversary of the UN, a critical moment to renew our common project. And the problems we face are real, but so is hope. As we strive to serve people, we also can be inspired by people. Over the past 2.5 years, I've spent time with young African girls learning to code, with teachers equipping young people with new skills for the future, with entrepreneurs in many fields leading the world innovation by innovation into the green economy. They and so many others are helping to build the future we want. Their aspirations and their human rights must always be our touchstone. We are here to serve. We are here to advance the common good while upholding our shared humanity and values. That vision united the founders of our organization. At a time of division today, we must reconnect with that spirit. Let us restore trust, rebuild hope, and move ahead together. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary-General of the United Nations for his presentation.